Hello everyone, Jeff with the Green Review here. I'm often asked if the koi and goldfish in the pond can stay there over the winter time. They can, that's what they would do in nature of course, but people wonder if the ice freezes over, what happens to the fish. Well, water at about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, about 39, and about 4 degrees Celsius is denser than water warmer or colder, and so it sinks to the bottom and the fish stay dormant in that 40-degree puddle at the bottom of the pond. Colder water eventually forms ice, and ice floats on the surface and insulates the cold water down at the bottom of 40 degrees from the much colder air that can go down into the negative degrees. So we want ice on the pond, but there's only so much water in the pond, there's only so much oxygen in the water, and eventually the fish and the frogs and the other things that are in the pond, the plants and the microorganisms, consume oxygen, and eventually they would consume all the oxygen. So we want to keep a small area ice-free. How do we do that? If you're in a climate that's only going to freeze over for a night or two, you might not have to do anything because there's going to be enough oxygen for the fish for those few short days. If you're in an area where it might freeze for a week or two, you might try something that agitates the water. We have right here a little fountain pump, and you can use this. It doesn't work in the really cold temperatures, but it works for a short period of time in some of the milder climates. We also have an air stone here. This is pumping air into the water and it bubbles up. Now both of these options need to be near the surface, because if they're down at the bottom of the pond taking the 40-degree water and putting it up to the surface where there's much colder air, then the pond is going to freeze much deeper. So we don't want these to be down at the bottom of the pond. We want them up near the surface. The other thing is the air stone is pumping very cold air into the water. So we don't want to really use that unless we're just in an area where we can get by with it for just a few days. What we're going to do on the ponds that are going to freeze much deeper is we're going to use a deicer. This thing is not set to keep the water warm, just a small area ice-free. So the temperature that it turns on is really close to freezing. It warms up a little bit and then it turns back off again. We don't really want the water warm at all. We want it to be 40-degree puddle on the bottom, insulating ice on top with a small area open for gas exchange. So let me show you a couple ways we can do the deicer to make it more efficient. Well, here I have 3 deicers. This one is a small one for a bird bath. It only has an electric output of about 100 watts. It's not very strong, not very warm in the coldest temperatures. This one is an interesting one. It has a small water pump down here, takes water from this deep down in the pond, sends it up here through a heating element that warms the water up to 40 degrees, puts the air in the water as it splashes back here, back into the pond, and so it's taking water from down low that doesn't have much oxygen and bringing it up to the surface. But it doesn't take away that 40-degree puddle in the bottom of the pond, because the heating element in here warms the water up to 40 degrees and lets it go back into the pond. So it's a very nice one for deeper ponds that might need to have some water mixed in at the lower levels. This one is the standard tank stock deicer that farmers use and is very inexpensive and is easy to get. Now, you might think that a 100-watt deicer would be much more energy efficient, but it's not. It's the same, it takes the same amount of electricity to raise the temperature of water, whether you do it slowly or quickly. So a 100-watt one takes 10 times longer to raise the water temperature than a 1,000-watt one does. The 1,000-watt one, though, will work into a much colder temperature and keep an area ice-free, whereas the 100-watt one in colder temperatures won't be able to keep up. It's like putting a pot of water in a refrigerator or freezer, putting a candle under it, and hoping that the candle can keep it warm enough that the freezer won't freeze it. It won't work as well as if you were to try to put a blowtorch, for instance, underneath there. The blowtorch would be able to keep up. Now, this isn't a blowtorch, but you get the idea. This is much more efficient, or in the colder temperatures. And that's not really efficient, it's just being able to keep up. To make it more efficient, you want to trap some of the heat. That's why we're sitting on this board. This deicer will go underneath this board. And it'll float under here. This board acts as a roof, so instead of letting the heat escape into the atmosphere, the heat bounces off the board and bounces back and forth and keeps a much larger area open. So to make a deicer more efficient, you need to trap some of that heat instead of letting it waste away into the atmosphere. So this board will actually do a much better job at keeping the pond more energy efficient than just trying to go to a smaller deicer. I will occasionally use this deicer under some gravel along the shoreline because it's for a bird bath, and that's what the gravel is in the shallow spots along the edge of the pond. The birds in the wintertime will still take a bath, and so we will use it along the shallow edges, so that we use the larger one to keep an area open for the fish and a smaller area, a little bit of ice-free area for the birds. We can use both. And I appreciate your watching it.